Welcome back to Glasgow Truth Group Radio. We hope you're well wherever you are in these challenging and interesting times, and we'd like to thank you for joining us in our first interview for 2012. We've had a few setbacks over the past 9 months or so, but we're back on track now, and we've got a lot more to come in terms of interviews and other media projects. So stay tuned at youtube.com/Glasgow Truth Group. Born in Dublin, Thomas Sheridan is an internationally renowned artist, author, musician, public speaker, and independent researcher currently based in the west of Ireland. His illustrations have appeared on the cover of newsstand magazines, books, and websites worldwide. He is best known for being the author of the book Puzzling People, The Labyrinth of the Psychopath. The book was well received, becoming an underground success, and has made Thomas's entire body of work reach a much larger audience. Today we'll be speaking to Thomas about the subject of psychopathy and the many levels on which this phenomenon relates to the human condition and our society at large. Well, hi Thomas, thanks for coming to talk to us today. We really appreciate it. And for people who perhaps are unaware of your work, or maybe haven't read the book, or even people who are sort of new to the concept or the subject of psychopathy altogether, I thought it might be cool if we could start off, if you could just sort of perhaps define the psychopath for a layman, and then go into a bit more detail about sort of what psychopathic psychology is, and how we can sort of recognize it.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, guys. My interest in psychopaths began in the mid-90s when I worked for a Wall Street investment bank. I was working for, well, I'm not going to name the bank in particular, but I'd worked for just about all the major Wall Street investment banks as a graphic designer. And there was people there that didn't seem right to me. Now, I wasn't prejudging them in terms of their humanity, but there was a certain lack of personality that just wasn't there. I didn't feel comfortable around them. They were very superficial, and they all seemed to cluster within middle management and senior management position within particular departments. And they didn't seem to be particularly dynamic or interesting people. They didn't seem to be particularly creative, but they were very, very glib, superficial, and they were very good at spouting cliches and, basically being very sort of superficial in a sort of a sycophantic and patronizing manner. I found that very interesting. It just seemed to me that those kind of structures were inherently dysfunctional for that reason alone. I just couldn't understand why those people were in that position. Now, I did manage to make friends with a guy there who admitted to me, he was a young guy, and he admitted to me that he was clinically diagnosed as a psychopath. Now, this may seem strange, but it came out of a kind of a conversation one day at lunch after we'd been out the night before and had a great time drinking. And he kind of opened up to me because I was telling him about my adventures when I was playing in a rock band. And then he came around and started, I guess he was trying to impress me or show off that he diagnosed. He started telling me about wild things he'd done, and then he says to me, "Oh, that's because I'm a psychopath." And I didn't know what a psychopath was then. I just thought a psychopath was an axe killer or someone who had a chainsaw. And he then told me this whole story, how he'd been sent for diagnostic testing by his family because he'd been driving them mad for years, and he scored very high on this scale. And this was a very interesting thing to me because suddenly I wasn't aware that there was a different kind of humanity that lived among the human race. I also wasn't aware that they were scientifically quantified. So then, on a very casual basis, I wouldn't say I got really serious into it until like after, say, 2001. I started out reading newspaper articles, science articles, get the odd, send away for the odd university, documented research thing on brain science relating to lack of empathy. And suddenly the world was a very different place for me. I was very aware there was people amongst us who were not like the rest of us. They were actually predatory but still I didn't really, I wasn't particularly impacted upon it for some reason until, say, the last 4 or 5 years, when I started to really bring this step back from the canvas where I picked up all this information of these little bits and pieces, step back and realize that my life had made a very interesting story. And through my life, whether it had been the music business, whether it had been working in business, whether it had been people I knew at school and stuff, there was a common thread of this individual who I came to term as a psychopath, which ran through areas of my life that didn't make, or parts of my life story that were quite mysterious to me. And I also realized that many other people, whether through relationships, through workplace bullying, through their many other things, their social interactions, also had these missing aspects, or these strange, puzzling people who entered into their lives. So then I began compiling all the information I could with the agenda of putting it into a very, very easy book to understand and read. Because the biggest frustration for me was, how come this stuff is not common knowledge? And then in the last, say, 5 years, when I started to look into, the greater control system, I was always kind of woke up anyway. I was always very cynical of politics and everything, and how the world was run. I never believed in the system had any virtue. But when it suddenly dawned on me that the reason why this stuff wasn't public information or wasn't widely known was because there was a vested interest in keeping a lid on this, because people who would discover that certain individuals who went through their lives and ravaged and damaged them may be psychopaths, well, then they'll put one and one together and get two, and start pointing at the top of the pyramid and realizing, my God, psychopaths are running the show, and everything from media to journalism to government to corporations, you name it, that's where they all are, particularly public bodies and supernatural bodies like things like the United Nations. And so my idea was to write a book that would tie all this up. It would help people understand it on the micro level, and then, without being too pushy about it, allow them to scale the experience up to the global level and realize that basically the human race is under attack by what I can classify quite clearly as, and the science is there, as a predatory subspecies that is coming to get us, has no empathy, and has no other concern for its own personal survival. Now, they don't team up in the way we think they team up. What they do is they cluster or coagulate within pathologically minded organizational structures. And this is why they rise to the top of the pyramid. They don't rise there because they're dynamic and they're brilliant. They rise there because they're devious, and they rise there because we live under a system that's probably been with us since the time of Babylon, that has allowed the pathological to rise to the top. In other words, the scum has floated to the top, and this is the problem that we have to deal with in the world today. And that's basically how I came into contact with the idea of the psychopathic control grid. Now, your other question about what is a psychopath, this is a very important question, and this is a very important thing that people have to become aware of. A psychopath, yes, can be an axe killer. A psychopath can be a mass murderer. A psychopath can chop people up in their basement and do horrific, physical things to them. But they're very, very rare. That would be 0.001% of psychopaths. The vast majority of psychopaths are a predatory humanoid that sees everyone else and everything else as opportunities and targets. A relationship is not a relationship, it's a target, it's an opportunity to find an enabler. So a psychopath will most likely come through a person's life as in a relationship. Someone will target them and flatter them and manipulate them and enter into their lives, and before they know it, they have to have their lives taken over by them. This is how most people encounter them. After a relationship, the most common area to encounter them would be in a job, a boss, a bully at work, or a bully even in an educational institution is very common. To find a psychopath there. This is where they'll find them. And then at the end of the day, all of us will be under the yoke of the psychopath, thanks to the psychopathic control grid that we currently live under, but I now believe is actually falling asunder. What is a psychopath as such? Well, Herbie Cleckley, in his 1940s book, The Mask of Sanity, brought it down to basically an individual who has an internal state of chaos, who is a facsimile for a normally functioning human being, and then uses this ability to mirror or to be a chameleon in order to manipulate and use other individuals. So basically they're projecting an internal chaos and an inability, a lack of personality structure in order to control the rest of us. So this is order out of chaos. This is where it comes from, the psychopathic mind trying to order us around out of their chaos.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it really does make sense when you look at it like that. The whole auto ab KO sort of philosophy. It's unfortunate though that, well, maybe not unfortunate, I mean it's probably quite deliberate that the sort of, say, mainstream sort of concept of what a psychopath is this sort of Alfred Hitchcock psycho, the axe wielding maniac, sort of wide eyed. We can spot them very easily sort of predictable, easily spotted, easily recognized. Just someone who's just crazy, sort of. But that's really not the case, is it?
No, they have, as Harry Cleckley said, a mask of sanity. Hitchcock's an interesting character. He made a film about 10 years prior to Psycho, called Shadow of a Doubt, which was a perfect portrayal of a regular psychopath, of a socialized psychopath, operating and manipulating a family in a small town in America. That's a very good film if anyone wants to see a film about a psychopath. Generally, the best films were made in the 30s, and like Scarlet Street. These are the movies that are Gaslight. The 30s and 40s where they actually had movies that told the story of what a psychopath was. Now, what happened with Hitchcock is Hitchcock is an interesting character. I'm very suspicious about him, especially his treatment of his female co-stars. It's almost like he made the movie Psycho in order to deflect from what he may have been. Now, Psycho, the movie itself, then on other levels, not only on the social dynamic level, but even in terms of psychiatry and psychology, it caused tremendous damage, because then they have to reclassify the term of a socialized psychopath to a sociopath. And this is where all this confusion today, with everything from all these obnoxious and misleading terms from antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and all these other things, this narcissistic personality disorder, have been used to dilute the pathology of the psychopath. That's why I specifically chose the term psychopath. It's the original term, and it terms best what these people are. Yeah.
I think isn't dissociative personality disorder another one? Is that one that's commonly used as well?
Now, dissociative personality disorder is a very different thing altogether, whether, again, if it's real or fake or not. But the idea behind that is, if you suffer a trauma, specifically, a common one is when it's almost like an extreme form of post-traumatic stress disorder, where if you've been a child who's been molested by a parent, or you've been through a horrific, like soldiers who have fought through the most horrific battles, and then they ask them later on, well, what was it like? And he says, I just don't remember. And they don't remember because what happens is, dissociative personality disorder, the brain is split off into different partitions, and these partitions are then put out of the conscious mind, but they're still retained within the subconscious mind. This is how the mind control slave works. This is all Sirhan, the mind control slave who was sent out to murder Robert Kennedy. He spoke very eloquently on the fact that he read his words and saw his documents and saw his interview and said, that was not me who killed Robert Kennedy. That's exactly how this whole monarch mind control slave thing. The CIA have been always interested in this stuff. So dissociative personality disorder is a very different thing, but it's not related to psychopathy.
It's not related to psychopathy. Okay.
No.
Right. It's a fascinating phenomena. I like the way you term it, sort of the interspecies predator, or maybe the subspecies interspecies predator, or however you want to term it.
That's not my term. That's Dr. Robert Hare of the University of British Columbia came up with the term interspecies predator, and So I'm not going to take credit for his brilliant insight in coming up with that term, but yes, he nailed it right there and then. And it's remarkable though. Like, I'm very interested in things like the history of folklore and the history of archetypes throughout metaphor and allegory in relation to psychopaths and psychopathic individuals. And it's funny how the term that he uses is almost like interspecies predator. Even after 30 years plus of working on this issue, he still can only come up but he still finds the best way of terming the condition is almost like a demonic archetype or something. So that's very interesting in and of itself. But he was the man who came up with that term.
Yeah, right. It's a very apt term, though, isn't it? It really is.
Brilliant. Yeah. No, it hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's always fascinated me, sort of the more I've looked into the concept of psychopathy, is what is it in terms of sort of how is it explained? How does sort of mainstream science or academia explain psychopathy? I mean, what do they say it is? Where did it come from? How did this sort of fracture between two different sort of sides of humanity begin? Where did it originate from, do you think?
Yeah,
Do you have any theories on that? Or?
Well, I'll give you my theory at the end, but I'll go to the mainstream stuff first and explain why it doesn't work. It's a notion of contradictions. You have psychiatrists who believe that it's caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, even though there's absolutely no empirical science or anything to back up this assertion. This is what they will tell you. That's if they even begin to admit there's such a thing as a psychopath. They don't even really want to. They've actually written it out of the Diagnostic Statistics Manual in order to put in all these other bogus, watered-down versions so they can sell treatment programs. So that's what they claim. It's a chemical imbalance in the brain. Not true. Now, a geneticist will tell you, and even though if it was ever going to be scientifically validated, it'll probably be true, a genetic thing. But still, they're still a long way off that. They'll tell you that it's some kind of genetic expression that lays dormant, and for some reason or other, it's unleashed within an individual, maybe through trauma, or maybe the expression just happens to click in. Again, the science on this is extremely dodgy. It's not. It's more like wishful thinking. You see, we live in an age where they're trying to prove that genetics is everything. Every single thing is in your genes. Even your favorite football team, they'll somehow tell you that's in your genes. Yeah. So there's a lot of that kind of thing going on, and that's a lot of that silliness is going on. Has entered into the psychopathology research thing. It hasn't been proven yet, but it's probably the best route to go down. Now, there's other people who say that, there's other scientists who say that it's a form of brain damage, and they'll point to things like a missing septum between the two hemispheres of the brain, where it stops the flood of neopinephrine, the stress hormone, from the reptilian lower complex of the brain, which is saturated with melanin, into the upper cortex, and this is what they can't damper their. They can't damper their emotional responses. Same with their limbic regions. But the thing is that these deficiencies are also shown within normal people as well. So it's like the genetic thing. The psychopaths seem to be like a predatory savant, which just appears in families. You could have like generations and generations of normal family unit, and then suddenly the psychopath shows up. And then you have a psychopath who has children, and he might have 5 or 6 children, and all the kids are normal, and their grandchildren are normal. So the genetic thing is very, very dodgy. The brain damage thing is extremely dodgy because there's other things. And I'll say, they have. This is one that I read recently in the New Scientist, and it really annoyed me. It wasn't New Scientist. Now, I'm not going to slander them if that's not true. I won't say New Scientist, whatever magazine it was, where they said that they have a deficiency in the front, a damaged frontal cortex. No, they don't. The prefrontal cortex is fine. It's just that they choose not to use it. You see, it's a predatory consciousness using a predatory brain. It's horses for courses. It doesn't need to use the parts of the brain it has no use for. So the frontal cortex is where we process emotions, a response to emotions is processed in the limbic regions, and then things like creativity and dreaming, and they're deficient in all those things as well. It's not because they're damaged in that part of the brain, it's just that they don't use them. In the same way our education system has trained us to switch off a right brain. We actually have brain damage because of our education system. We're too heavily left brain orientated. So there's actual neural pathways in the right hemisphere of the human brain which are shut down because that's not brain damage. That's something we're not using. That's a different thing than brain damage. When you start to learn a skill, these neural pathways. If you're a left brain fella or girl and you've never been interested in art, and suddenly you take up watercolor painting or something, you will start firing the synapses in these parts of your brain that you didn't use before. That's not brain damage. That's just a partition that's not being used. A psychopath is very different. They cannot process the information in their brain in any specific cerebral partition. It's almost like they have to just use whatever they can up there, and that's why they're always in a light alpha wave mode of sleep. You see, it's very interesting stuff here we're going into because it ties to so many other things. Alpha wave mode is also what television does to your brain. When you watch television, after 15 minutes, your brain goes into alpha wave mode, which makes you very susceptible to advertising. Their brains operate in this way all the time. So that's it. It hasn't been proven conclusively it's genetic. It's definitely not brain damage. It's definitely not. What was the other one I said? Brain damage. Genetic and
chemical imbalance.
Chemical imbalance by psychiatry. Thanks. It's not those things because these things are present in people who are not psychopaths. Now, there's the other side to that as well. There are people who they will say that a person can be made a psychopath by environmental or cultural conditioning. Say they grew up in a war or an extreme sectarian situation. That's not a pure psychopath. That's a normal human being that's been made into a proto-psychopath. They're lashing out at the world. You can actually fix them people. If you get them away and you reform them, you can actually help those people, even by something like a bit of kindness, love and compassion can be enough to fix them. Because what they're really doing is they're not psychopaths as such. They're angry and they're lashing out at the world. They're the proto-psychopaths. So that dismisses the whole idea that psychopaths are made by the environment they're in, because they're not. Because these, like Tony Blair and George Bush, did not grow up in the ghetto. They did not grow up disadvantaged. So immediately off the back there, that theory is bogus as well.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to throw in my theory, and I've yet to have anyone, academic or any otherwise, tell me I'm wrong. My theory is that behind every human being is consciousness. That consciousness is non-local to the human brain. Whatever consciousness, I don't know what it is, it's behind the brain, and we use consciousness. Our consciousness uses our brain and nervous system as an almost like an operating system to
it's
drive
like a vehicle,
around this.
isn't it?
A vehicle, yeah, a computer, a hard drive, to drive around this five-sense reality. That's it.
Yeah.
A psychopath has a predatory consciousness. It's an expression of the duality we all have in nature. Up, down, left, right, yin, yang, positive, negative. There's positive and negative consciousness. And for some reason, I believe it's evolutionary, that nature in recent time, since the last 3,000 years, has unleashed this pathological consciousness upon us in order for us to develop more socially and culturally and personally empathic models, in order to us to have a better planet for humans to live on, and by extension all biological organisms on this planet as well. And to me, that's what the whole thing is. It's an underlying predatory consciousness, and it's here for an evolutionary purpose for a while, in order for us to. This is what the Great Awakening is. This is what social movements have been about, to make. This is what even things like labor movements in the past have been about, to try and make life better for ordinary people and for ordinary humans. That nature doesn't make mistakes, and it's not making the mistakes with 4% of the human population, because that's literally how many there are. And they're psychopathic to some degree. They're not all full on, but they still all have the same basic traits in terms of their pathology. And this is what's going on here. And this is also why there's a sudden explosion of interest in the psychopathic issue, because the human race is suddenly dawning on them that we're under attack. And in the past, the psychopaths at the top have always told us it's different religions, it's different classes, it's different economic systems. No, we all know, you guys know this. When you look behind the curtain, you see the same guy operating the strings of all the divide and conquer tactics. And that's what the psychopath is. And this is the issue. It's facing us now, and it's the issue we have to deal with in order for the human race to move forward.
Yeah, it's so true what you're saying. I was just thinking about politicians there. Like when you think of politicians, they're really like middlemen. They're sort of groomed and trained for their purpose.
You
sort of throw the rotten fruit and veg at them.
Oh yeah. This is what common purpose groups like Common Purpose exist for. What they call future leaders.
Yeah.
And these, what are the future leaders according to the Common Purpose ethos? They're the psychopaths.
Yeah.
They're looking for the psychopaths. And this all came out of things like the London School of Economics, where all this neoliberalism crap that's been wrecking the world's economy now since the time of Reagan and Thatcher all from as well. You see, this is what they're like. And you see, unfortunately, democracy is the best system in the world for a psychopath, because they're natural-born liars. They're natural-born swindlers and con men. Tell me what you want, vote for me, and I'll give it to you. And as soon as they're elected, I never said that.
Yeah.
You couldn't have invented a better system for psychopaths to function in than democracy.
It is. It's perfect, isn't it? Because once you vote them in, I've yet to see a contract that says that the politician must do what they said they're going to do after they've been elected. I mean, there's zero accountability. I mean, democracy is basically, we give you two front men, you get to pick one, or Tweedledum or Tweedledee, psychopath A or sociopath B, and once they're in, they're off.
Yep.
It's like night and day, and yet people still keep falling for the same con over and over again, as if it's going to be different this time.
Oh yeah, and if you look in the background, the individuals, regardless of who's in power, you always see the same individuals.
Yeah.
The Zbigniew Brzezinskis, the Henry Kissingers,
Yeah.
the Madeleine Albrights, the Hillary Clintons,
Yeah.
the Peter Mandelsons.
Yeah.
That's your real government, folks. You know, and this is what people have to start. This is why they must stop voting. Kill this system off, because it's not your friend. It's not working for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of effort sort of seems to be going into trying to save the system at the moment. And one of the things that we at sort of the Glasgow Truth Group agree on, or at least me and Scott anyway, is that the system itself is a psychopathic system. It's corrupt it's got corruption built into it. I mean, you can't separate the corruption from and the sort of psychopathic thinking, the psychopathic structuring. You can't separate that from the system. It's not a matter of a few bad apples that you can kind of yank out there and make it all okay again, because the system itself was being built from the ground up by a psychopathic consciousness, and so they're inseparable. You know, you can't expect it's broken. It can't be fixed. We need something else.
Yeah, it really began in Babylon. What happened was, in Babylon, because they had control of the food, because the mass irrigation systems allowed that Mesopotamian plain to have a regular and ongoing carbohydrate-based food supply. Very, very good system for controlling the people. Suddenly, the Babylonian priest class, or whatever they were, the royalty, these guys suddenly realized that this idea of an annual harvest, these psychopaths discovered that this is a very good way to maintain control. You can control their food supply, you can control their diet, you take the protein and the saturated fats out of their diet, they can't think as well as they used to think. And so they became dependent upon the system. And this is what happened in Babylon, and this is where the pyramidal system came from. This is where the idea of the media came from, the middlemen between the leaders and the people to feed them the lies. And it's been all they've been doing is building that Babylonian pyramid from the top down all the way through history to today, where you have these bureaucracy upon bureaucracy. You know, just look at the amount of NGOs and quangos there are in the average Western. Yeah, in the average Western nation, and this is confusion. But ultimately, it all funnels up to that eye, that reptilian dead eye at the top of the pyramid that's came from Babylon. Now, when I say reptilian, I'm not talking about the David Icke notion of a shape-shifting reptilian being. I'm talking about the reptilian complex, which is the lower part of the brainstem. The reptilian complex is our primitive early brain, in evolutionary sense, driven by fear, terror, and survival of the fittest, sexual activity, and that's all that drives it. And that's when I use the word reptilian, I'm talking about the reptilian complex of the brain. I'm not talking about, the Duchess of Kent shape-shifting into a 9-foot lizard and driving around the earth inside the moon. And this is real stuff we have to grasp here, because you see, this is what's so important. It's when we're going out to tell people, look, the world is a mess, we want to help them, we have to be very carefully choose our words and explain ourselves. And this is a problem that the Wake Up movement or the Truth movement has had. There's too many people who see a YouTube video or something and they suddenly think that's the full answer, and you'll find out it's very easily debunkable if they're not careful. Like, for instance, last week, I'm actually, this is probably the first radio show I've really ever talked about 9/11, but I'm actually quite I don't like talking about 9/11 because there's lots of reasons for it. I think it's a big trap in order to trap people into, because
an energetic trap,
of endless debate and endless scenarios rather than actually getting to the truth.
Very well designed, I think, to be exactly that, in my opinion.
And
so
the
you
thing
can get sort of trapped in the speculation as well.
Yeah, and I know it stinks to high heaven. I know the whole thing stinks to high heaven. I don't know what really happened, because no one except but I do believe on some levels that both the official and the unofficial stories kind of merge together into a truth that we're not supposed to find.
Yeah.
However, there are things like that, even to a complete moron like Building 7, that just can't be explained, right? With the planes flying to the buildings beside it. Now, having said that, I saw a video last week on YouTube that someone had sent to me, and it showed me Building 7 from some camera angle, and then the windows popping, going black, and noises going off. And I came so close to saying, "Oh my God, that's it. That is the undebunkable evidence And I came so close to actually telling other people about it. And then I went to research and found out that the windows popping and the was CGI that someone had done from another video, and the explosion sounds were put in there from somewhere else. And this is why we always have to be careful, because that's how psychopaths think. That they're not clever, they're not creative, they're not dynamic, but by God are they devious. And that's and this information is one of the things they excel in. You see, if you're in a relationship with a psychopath and the relationship ends, they begin, before it ends, they launch a massive smear campaign. And I can promise you that the 9/11 truther movement was set up prior to 9/11.
You can tell when you look at I mean, even someone like Alex Jones, for instance, it was obviously put in place well before 9/11, many years before. And then of course you have, after 9/11, you have all these very well organized, quite well funded, well sort of led groups just sort of coming out of the woodwork. And then there's a whole bunch of sort of platforms and organizations they're just sort of they're just, you can tell, they're too well organized. They're done very professionally. You can tell there's big money behind it, and whenever there's big money behind it, I mean, it's nothing more needs to be said, really.
Case like the Good Shepherds.
Yeah, and also you have like these this is another way the psychopaths are working the game, is now they fill the TV shows with all Jesse Ventura's conspiracy theory, and now conspiracy is mainstream. Now people are saying in the alternative movement, particularly in America, we've broken through. No, you haven't. What they're doing is they're taking ownership of the issue, they're going to process it, and then they're going to leave it away, and then say, conspiracy theory, that's so 2011. Nobody talks about that stuff anymore. And that's right. And you see, they did the same thing with the psychopaths. Just, within a few months of my book coming out and maybe appearing all over the place, now I'm not saying it's related, but there was an explosion around the same time, right before me and right after.
You're absolutely right.
People. And then who comes along? John Ronson, the ultimate disinformation liberal journalist of the Guardian, brings a book out on psychopathology. That's actually, when you start reading through it, tells you at the end, there's no, the end story of it is, there's such a thing as psychopaths, but they don't really have that much power. And then and an indirect attack upon many of the people who actually have been doing the great work in this subject for years. And so the idea with that book was, we've dealt with psychopaths. You saw John Ronson.
It's done now.
No, it's not. Well, it hasn't worked for them. It's not working for them. And it's just like all their other stuff is not working for them. Because what's happening is the people who are completely... The people who are in the truth movement, whatever you want to call it, I don't even like calling it the truth movement, because it even has there's no absolute
label
truth.
On it,
there's no absolute truth as such when you think about it. They're now looking at other ways and other ways of doing things. There's a more sort of an individualistic approach. They love getting us into gangs and then taking control of that gang. And that's a very psychopathic way of functioning. So there's a lot of there's a lot of positives happening now, but they tried with the Occupy movement, and that was a colossal failure as well, because it was so obviously a setup, and the Coney movement as well, that Coney 2012 thing. So obvious, the schmaltz, then the tug at your heartstrings, and then the guy who runs the whole thing, well, he showed his true colours when somebody asked him about the money, where all the money went to. Next thing you know, he's running down the street screaming, masturbating.
That's right.
Another diversion,
Yeah, another distraction. More bread and circuses for the truth movement to they can pick apart and sort of analyze and think and just more ridiculousness.
And the ridiculousness of groups like We Are Change New York following around celebrities for a celebrity endorsement. Oh, look, we found a celebrity who questions 9/11. What that? I mean, when you think about that, it's like it's like you don't need Roseanne Barr to tell you the truth about anything because she's a multi-millionaire, or Michael Moore or Susan Sarandon. It's the same old crap over and over again. This is the psychopaths leading us. I'm not saying We Have Changed New York psychopaths. I don't mean that. I mean, I'm sure they're well-meaning people, but however, they're making the same old mistake. You don't need the mainstream to validate what you believe. If it resonates true, this is like the whole thing with the psychopaths. I never had any fear about writing this book or being public about this stuff, because I knew intuitively inside me what I was saying was right, and it was basically undebunkable. because, for lots of reasons. And it hasn't been debunked yet, and it won't be debunked because, the truth is noetic. It's something you know inside you. And this is how we have to learn how to be within this alternative community. We have to learn to follow what resonates within our heart after we've looked and sat back and be very careful about it. Because psychopaths are setting all kinds of traps for us. Everything from YouTube videos to TV shows to fear jocks.
So we're back with Thomas Sheridan after a minor technical hiccup. And we were just discussing the sort of co-opting and corruption of the truth movement, and how the whole thing basically was started by the sort of psychopathic elite at the top of the establishment. It's more than just something that it was grassroots and then got co-opted. It was actually started by them, so they could control it from the word go, and make sure that everybody's attention, everybody's energy was being directed back into a cause that will ultimately benefit their own agenda.
Yeah, I'll give you examples from history where that psychopathic co-opting and engineering has been put into place before. I was on holiday in Vienna, and somebody pointed out to me a famous coffee shop in Vienna where back in the 1910s, 1920s, both Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin used to actually go to this coffee shop. And yet nobody seemed to come to the conclusion. Like, I just found it amazing that of the two great engineers of World War II, in terms of mass carnage and destruction, had actually been visiting the same coffee shop in Vienna at the same time. The chances of that happening must be astronomical. Yeah. And yet it did happen. So you either think that the devil was the owner of that coffee shop, or they were both there for some reason getting the same orders from the same people. Now, is there proof of this? No. But there's definitely something suspicious there that led to that. And what a good historical way of looking at that would be to look at someone like Leon Trotsky. Now, Trotsky somehow weaseled his way to the United States and fell into the favor of Wall Street investment bankers. He then was sent back to back to Russia with a big bag of money via Halifax in Nova Scotia, where he had landed suddenly at the center of the Soviet uprising, and found himself in government after the revolution had been, it hadn't been won immediately, but after the actual Bolsheviks had seized a tremendous amount of power. There was an enormous amount of resistance against the revolution. It was mostly people in urban areas, and not all urban cities in Russia, who were in favor of the Bolsheviks. There was vast swathes of rural Russia that wasn't, and especially other ethnic groups that were very vehemently against it, like the Tatars in the south. Trotsky, being a spectacular psychopath, then basically found a way to quell this anti-Bolshevik movement by murdering everybody. And how he did it was, being a psychopath himself, he knew the local psychopaths all around regional Russia. If he gave them money, they just murder people, because a psychopath has no conscience. It has no ability to feel for the suffering of another human being. So if you walk up to any psychopath and you give them $1 million and say, look, here's a chance, if you kill your family tonight, you've got this $1 million and you'll vanish into the world with a new identity and no one will ever hear of you again, the psychopath will do it. No problem. Because it doesn't matter if it's his family. Once he knows he can get away with it. So Trotsky, what Trotsky did was, he recruited basically these goons, these like lapdogs, who's low-level psychopaths in and around all over Russia, and then all over the Russian sub-states and various provinces, and basically told them to look for any opportunity you could to arrest people. Any opportunity. It could be a young couple coming back late one night from out courting or whatever like that, and then kill them. So vast amounts of mainly young people were taken into the basement of cellars all over the Soviet Union and brutally executed in their tens of thousands, if not millions. And the idea that Trotsky said, kill as many as possible because we'll put a bullet of fear. No, he didn't say that. That was later. That was Chairman Mao said that. Another psychopath. He said we'll put the fear into them that they'll be even afraid to even say anything about anything. They'll just stay in their homes terrified that they'll be shot. And this is what happened. He even took He even personally took place in firing squads himself, killing women and children. And they just killed vast numbers of people because he knew these low-level psychopaths who were just like him would then go to the houses of the people they murdered and steal the stuff there, or even steal their house, and because they would have this power. And this is what happens with a psychopath in a position of power. He understands that his constituency are the other low-level psychopaths below him, and these are the ones that he'll give the money to. And that's who these infiltrators of all these groups are. Whether it's a truth movement group, or whatever you call it, an alternative political group, the Occupy group. The psychopaths at the top will look for the psychopaths at the bottom in order to help them maintain control. And generally they don't shoot people anymore because they can't get away with it, but they'll do it through things like disinformation, ridicule, the very important one, the smear campaigns, where you may have some people within an organisation, say an anti-fox hunting or anything organisation, and the upper level psychopaths will encourage, often with financial means, the low level psychopaths to go implement smear campaigns, whispering campaigns, disinformation campaigns against the most credible and honest people within that movement, and drive them out in order that no nobility and no sense of virtue or purity takes over. And this is what happened with Trotsky in the Soviet Union. He needed the scum. He wanted the scum. He knew that they were the foundation of that revolution. So, the first people that were up against the wall were the early Soviet youth committees, who were actually the ones who wanted that revolution for the right reasons. And they were always the first ones to be shot. The first group that Hitler shot was the brown shirts, his faithful servants. So, and then they'll get the psychopaths to do that. And this is how they've always controlled revolutions. They found the psychopaths, they infiltrate them, and they funded them to destroy it from within. Now then we have Trotsky, who eventually was driven out by another psychopath himself, Joseph Stalin, and ended up in Mexico getting a pickaxe in his ear hole that was given to him by George Orwell's Spanish tutor when they were living in Barcelona. This is why when people talk about connecting to the dots, it's always the same thing. These people they don't only give us our enemies, but they also give us our heroes.
Yeah.
And that's how a psychopath functions. Because psychopaths are ultimately driven by two things: power and control. And even things like, when you think about all money and sex is, and at the end of the day, it's still power and control. Because a psychopath doesn't enjoy sex the way a normal person does. A psychopath just sees sex as a means to control another human being.
Yeah. It's got a lot to do with energy dynamics as well. Does it not? It's just like a way of for the psychopath to, almost like a vampire, to sort of suck energy out of people, and it reminds me of the way that you see some of these psychopathic or sociopathic politicians up there in front of millions, bald-faced lying, but getting a real kick off all the yells and the screams and the cheers and the flag waving and all this kind of stuff. It's sort of an energetic sort of aspect to it, doesn't it?
Oh, that's a drug they live on. This is ultimately what we get back to the idea of a predatory consciousness. Ultimately, what they're after is energy. Energy in money, energy in sex, energy in your devotion, energy in your emotions. It all funnels it into the same thing at the end of the day. Yeah. They are and this is why they're all through metaphor and allegory and folklore. The motif of the psychopath in everything from the guise of werewolves, vampires, succubi. They're all the same thing. They're the jinn. They're all the same thing. They're there to get your energy from you. Now you would have had, like in folklore. It's interesting that nearly all the folk fairy tales come from Germany at a time of the Reformation, where it would have been kind of difficult to talk about supernatural subjects, as you would have been born at the stake as being a witch. So they transferred a lot of these sort of these supernatural stories into fairy tales. You'd have like people who would transform into wolves, that kind of thing. And Rapunzel, that would be the female psychopath, luring men to their deaths by dropping her hair down, could be seen as a sort of an allegory for her reptilian complex. See, female psychopaths have very high sex drive and very high sex appeal because of the high levels of testosterone that all psychopaths have, both male and female, caused by their hormonal imbalance, caused by their very strange brain functioning. So you'd have that. That was the whole thing. In the Gaelic tradition, you had a fairy called the Leannan She, where she was a female sort of fairy who would look for an artist, a writer, a poet, some very creative guy who was, that had a lot of potential to change the world. She would become his muse, and then she would suck the energy out of him and kill him before he ever had the chance to share his gift with the world, and then move on to another artist, poet, or musician. And that's the groupie in rock and roll, isn't it? The psychopathic groupie in rock and roll who bounces from one rock star's bed to the next, making them fall in love with them and then dumping them,
Yeah.
And that's where all the love songs come from, the heartbroken songs come from. So you see, we're so stitched up by them here. It's really amazing. But they've always been with us, and we've always known about them. And it wasn't until for the last century we've actually been able to give them a name. But it's not until right now that we've actually can have them on the run. And I actually do now. If you're talking about the energy thing again, I get contacted because I run a forum called psychopathfree.com, and it helps people recover and deal with the issue of psychopathic relationships. And the most common thing I hear from people is, on top of everything else, I felt like my energy was drained by this person. I felt like my energy, even my personality, couldn't function anymore. Because a psychopath will even steal your personality. Because a psychopath has no personalities as such. What they have are bespoke or contrived, manufactured personas to work their targets. This is why you can have someone like Tony Blair, who's walking around now wondering why he's not getting Nobel Peace Prizes for converting to being a Catholic, and he's not a war criminal anymore. His previous persona may have been a war criminal, but the version of Tony Blair that exists now is no longer liable for what his previous thing had done. In my forthcoming book, which comes out on May 1st, called Defeat the Demons, I will be going very much into the idea of the transitional psychopath, how the psychopath transitions from one fake persona to the next. There's been some phenomenal work done in Canada where they've interviewed prisoners, psychopathic prisoners, after they had done the diagnostic test and found them. And they found that the psychopathic prisoners did a couple of things that were very interesting, and I've noticed this too in my own life and my own work, but this has been scientifically validated now. They use things called the fluencies. What the fluencies are is these things we use in regular speech. They use them to a far more greater degree than a normal person does, because what they're doing is they're buying time to build a new lie to validate the previous lie that just told you during the conversation. Another thing too is they always talk about their deeds and their behavior in past tense. Now, not like, a regular prisoner would say, I raped a woman back in 1983. A psychopath will say, I'm not responsible for that rape. Why? Because I raped the person back in 1983. The person I am now didn't do it. Now, isn't that a politician for you?
Yeah.
Isn't that a politician who's been caught lying? Well, so many of them will say, oh, well, I'm different now. That's not me. That was a different me. And that's how we know how many that's how we can instantly tell a psychopath in politics or in corporations that I'm not responsible for those crimes. Another version of me was. They won't say it like that, but that's how they try to portray it. Another thing that Robert Hare in his book Snakes and Suits, which he co-wrote with Paul Babiak, which was an excellent insight into corporate psychopathology, was there was something called beats. Beats are when you move your hand and make a certain gesture. It's been shown that psychopaths do this more than others. I've now determined through my own work that there's more to this than just them buying a lie. It's to take your attention off their eyes and put it on their hand when they're lying. This is because I found this out because you see politicians, they have the slight thumb up thing they do, and they push their hand forward when they're lying, when they're doing a speech. Like Bill Clinton always does it, and so does Tony Blair. They push their hand forward in almost like a thumbs up sign, and they'll tell you to stress the point. But when these guys are making those speeches, it's very, very difficult to pay attention to their eyes, because your eyes are constantly going to their hands, so you can't tell if they're lying or not. And I've actually stitched all this together. I found that that's an old Jesuit trick. An old Jesuit trick is to move the hand around while you're telling a lie. That way you haven't committed the sin of telling a lie. because you're not looking into someone's eye. And that's where the whole thing of like, look into my eyes and tell me the truth comes from. This is an old Jesuitical psychopathic tactic to tell a lie and get away with it, both in a sort of a pseudo-theocratic sense and also in a deceptive sense. And that's why politicians, and we all know that they all went to these all these seminars and training groups they go to are all based on these kind of like centuries of manipulation and deceit. So the next time you see a politician not pointing when he's talking, but putting his hand out and with the thumb up, he's telling a barefaced lie, and that's called a beat. So you see, this is what's so frustrating for me. There's phenomenal and fantastic science into psychopathology that's so well validated, and yet it's hidden from us, and it's hidden from us because this is the mechanism we can bring these bastards down with.
Yeah. It's the old saying, knowledge is power, and obviously that works for them because the more knowledge of us they have, the more power they have to manipulate us. But the same works back the other way. The more knowledge we have of them, the more ability we have to empower ourselves and break free of that sort of master-slave dynamic that they've all got us under.
That's absolutely spot on. That's exactly what it is. In many ways, we're with the whole idea of using the angle of the psychopath, we're using their tactics against us back at them.
Yeah.
You see, you'd look at someone like Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew. When he came to the United States with a mountain of Sigmund Freud's insight into the workings of the human mind, particularly in regards to the things like the seduction theory and the sexualization of human beings, right, and how that could be used to manipulate them. This is a 24-year-old guy who suddenly shows up in the Woodrow Wilson cabinet with the agenda of actually getting the United States, which was an isolationist nation at the time, into World War One, and he invents this whole idea of the German soldier running around with a baby on the end of a bayonet, which is completely contrived. Well, and later on, when the war was over, he invents public relations, and these public relations they made women smoke by telling them it was freedom to smoke and things like that. And
tortures of freedom,
And at the end of his life, he was walking around calling the human race idiots. If that's not a psychopath, I don't know what is. But again, when I worked for a Wall Street investment bank, they had a phenomenal research library in the skyscraper I was in, and Bernays was a god. Because the financial system is all about the manipulation and the deception of the magician's sleight of hand, the magus and the shadow, the mirror, the whole thing. You think of that movie, the Bruce Lee movie, Enter the Dragon, that final scene at the end where he's in the Hall of Mirrors trying to find the psychopath, and then it's not until he keeps hitting the mirror because he's hitting the reflection, and then when he finally realizes that the actual psychopath is the empty space in the middle of the room that he hasn't been paying attention to, then he defeats him. So it's the same thing. They keep us looking at the reflections of ourselves and of their pathology in the wall around us. We never actually focus on the target, which is the psychopath in the center of the room. And they're being uncovered now, and they're in a state of panic. Are we going to take this break soon, or what?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking we're coming up for about an hour now, so it's probably time to round things off and have maybe a 5-10 minute break, and we'll pick up again in hour 2. So just for people who might want to be looking at some of your websites, Thomas, and the books that you've done, can you give a bit of information on that?
Okay, my website is thomassheridanarts.com. My book is called Puzzling People, The Labyrinth of the Psychopath. There's a link to the shop there where you can actually buy it on Amazon or wherever your local area is. There's also, I have a new book coming out on May 1st called Defeat the Demons, and I'll announce that more publicly when it's available for sale. I'm also doing an interesting tour that's coming up. I'm going to be speaking in Dublin Saturday the 27th of May, Manchester on the 2nd of June, and in London on I think it's the 3rd of June. Yeah, it's the 3rd of June, which is a Sunday. I'm going to be on the same bill as John Perkins, who wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman, William Engdahl, who wrote the book about Monsanto, Caesar's Deception, along with Ian Crane, and Brian Gerrish will be in the London gig, and it's called the Financial Terrorism Tour. And we're going to be talking a lot of, I'm bringing my aspect of psychopaths into it as well, but it'll be more than just a hardcore thing. We'll be talking about how this is really human evolution that's taken place.
Yeah, that's is that not organised by the ICANN Planet guys?
No, I Can Plan is doing the Manchester one.
Right.
And the London one is done by, I think it's being done by, UK Column, the newspaper.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The Dublin one is being done by One World Scam, that organisation.
Right.
And so I Can Plan. Also, thanks for reminding me. I've also you can get my DVD Breaking the Babylon Mind from icanplanet.com.
And you have a website, was it Blogspot, was it?
Well, if you type in thomassheridanarts.com, it'll bring you directly to the Blogspot one, so it's an easy one to remember. So thomassheridanarts.com.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Thomas. We'll take a wee break, and we'll see you again in hour 2.